strange rhetoric that is now coming out from Washington, that the US will remain a member of NATO and will also be committed to the defense of Europe.
And the Pentagon considering proposal to cut thousands of troops from Europe, officials say. Experts warn that the timing of the potential drawdown could alarm NATO allies and embolden Russian President Vladimir Putin. Can such US actions really inspire the Russian dictator?
Yes, one fears that this could be something that is seen as a sign of weakness on the part of the West. And we know from the past that such impressions of weakness are then escalatory. And that is often something also misunderstood, especially in Western Europe, less so, I think, in Central Eastern Europe, where people basically know how Russian imperialism works. So in Germany, in my home country, for instance, there are many people who believe if we show weakness, military weakness, this will be sort of good for peace, whereas in fact the opposite is true, that signs of weakness then lead to escalation. And it was the wrong impression that Russia had of Ukraine, that Ukraine is weak. And that's why the large invasion started in 2022. That's why we have now this war. That was a miscalculation by Russia. And I think also that Europe is strong without the US, but we could again have a miscalculation on Moscow's side, and we could then even have an escalation, let's say in Estonia, at the city of Narva, where Russia would think that it can sort of revise the results of the downfall of the Soviet Union, at least partly, and then count on European weakness. And that may be a miscalculation, as it was with Ukraine. But then once you are in a war, then it's very, very difficult, as we now see with the Russian-Ukrainian war, it's very difficult to get out of it. So this impression of weakness that the American behavior now is giving is very dangerous.
I want to continue this topic. International press and military analysts are increasingly writing about the danger of Russia's attack on European countries. In your opinion, is Europe ready for such a tide of events, and which countries are for today most ready?
I guess the countries that are most ready are also the most in danger. These are Finland, the Baltic countries, Poland. These are the countries that also have the most immediate concerns about the security of their borders. And the problem are largely the West European countries, also some East European countries like Hungary. But the West European countries are problematic because they still live in this old world, the pre-2014, I would say, world in which basically there was some sort of established order that more or less functioned. With 2014, with the annexation of Crimea, I think this European order fell down. But many, for instance, in my home country, in Germany, do not want to see that. They think if they only believe that this is not true, then it will not be true, and they are still talking about pacifism and about not investing in defense and security. So the large countries still need a sort of a transitional period. That's why I'm saying it will be very important that the US is not so quickly leaving Europe. If it's in stages, if it's sort of drawn over several years, then countries like Germany, the Netherlands, Italy, and so on, they can adapt to the new situation, but they cannot as quickly change as it now looks necessary.
Ukrainian officials will visit the US at the end of this week for talks on a deal governing post-war plans to exploit mineral deposits and rebuild infrastructure. What is your opinion about the second round of these meetings? Can it end well for Ukraine?
I'm not sure, because this is a very strange development. We had at first an apparently unacceptable proposal from the US to Zelensky, which he flatly rejected. That was a scenery when the finance minister of the US went to Kiev and had then a very difficult conversation. Then we had actually, in a second stage, an acceptable proposal, an acceptable draft for a deal between the US and Ukraine about the joint exploitation of Ukrainian rare earth and other minerals and so on. And then a third draft appeared, which looks almost neo-colonial, because it's designed that the US will actually take over large parts of the Ukrainian economy and of its natural resources. So this draft was then again very strange, and I hope that now the negotiations will perhaps return to the second draft, which Zelensky was already ready to sign, but then there was this scene in the White House, and then the whole deal did not work out. So hopefully this time it will work out, and there will be a deal that is acceptable to Ukraine, and then perhaps indeed this could be a reset then also for Ukrainian-American relations.
We really hope. We really hope. And about something interesting and a little bit crazy, President Volodymyr Zelensky said that the Ukrainian Defense Forces captured 2 Chinese citizens who fought on the side of Russia. There is also information that there are more than 2 such soldiers. Does this somehow change China's role in the Russian-Ukrainian war?
If these were indeed serving Chinese soldiers and not just, let's say, volunteers, Chinese volunteers who have joined the Russian army, then this would be a major development. If indeed these are actually serving soldiers, officers, whatever, of the Chinese army, that would change the nature of the war, and it would be also a violation of the various agreements between China and Ukraine. So, for instance, many people don't know that, but there's a friendship treaty between China and Ukraine, a fully ratified friendship treaty signed under Yanukovych, but then ratified by China when Poroshenko was already president of Ukraine after the annexation of Crimea and after the war started in 2014. So there is this friendship treaty, and there's a large article in this friendship treaty which is about the mutual recognition of territorial integrity, inviolability of borders, national sovereignty. And if it turns out that these Chinese persons are serving army members of the Chinese, of the People's Liberation Army, the Chinese army, then this would be a major development. But maybe they are just volunteers. I mean, then on both sides of the front line, there are many sort of outside volunteers who have come to either to Ukraine or to Russia to fight. So if these are just private persons, then this would be less of an issue.
I want to discuss some interesting news from The Hill. The media writes that some of the US politicians discussed the Nixon to China policy in recent weeks. In this scenario, the US would make concessions in Ukraine and thereby pull Russia out of China's orbit. Do you believe in such a scenario? And does the United States really need Russia in this regard?
Yes, this is usually among experts called the reverse Kissinger. So when in the 1970s there was a rapprochement between the United States and China, that was a sort of a trick used by Kissinger to contain the Soviet Union. And that happened in the early 1970s at a time when the relations between the Soviet Union and China were tense. And then there was this sort of half alliance between China and the US, and was then at that time regarded as a big success for US foreign policy to get basically China into a sort of front against